All right, good afternoon or good morning, everybody, and welcome to our online conference on moving to big data presented by O'Reilly and sponsored by Microsoft. Today we're going to spend some time looking at how enterprise engagement and adoption of big data plays out over the coming years. And we have good reason to believe this is going to be a pretty interesting topic because the impact of big data is already being seen in a number of places, and our real interest in seeing this stuff evolve comes from its broader application across industries, organizations, and governance. We have a huge list of great presenters today. I'm thrilled and excited to hear what they have to say, and ecstatic that we were able to put this together. This is a free presentation from O'Reilly, sponsored by Microsoft, who have been supporting our efforts to get the word out about big data and the Strata conference over the past few months, and we're very, very thankful to them for being able to put it on. And we have a great lineup of speakers today. I'm going to say a few words about what the move to big data for enterprises entails, and then we're going to get started with some of our speakers. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping notes. We should let you know that the hashtag, if you want to chat about what you're seeing today, is #StrataConf. That's # Strata, STRATA, CONF. And there is a chat room in line in the system, and so you can join us in the Q&A. We're going to be pushing some questions to you later. We'd love to hear your thoughts on those questions. And we're going to have a brief break in the middle. And during that time, we'll spend a little time talking about what trends we're seeing and asking some of you for your feedback on how the changes we're seeing from big enterprise are playing themselves out in the enterprise and in your businesses. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to give you guys a little bit of background on the subject of big data and some of my thoughts about why this is going to be a big topic for enterprises. If you want to yell at me, you can do so on Twitter at @AKroll. More than happy to chat with you there or here in the Q&A. I want to talk about getting inside the loop. Now, if you're an enterprise IT professional, you probably have some rather strange views about big data. If you're used to dealing with traditional database tools, SQL, and so on, the chances are that a lot of these terms around big data either look weird or they look like things that are a little too far down the road to worry about. And many of the people with whom I've spoken about big data have some pretty strong feelings about what that's going to do to their jobs. There's no doubt that both big data tools and traditional database tools, data warehouses, and so on are trying to do the same thing, meaning they're trying to store information and then answer questions when people ask them. And those two naturally mean there will be some blood between the eclipsing of some of the more legacy data technologies and some of these new technologies we're seeing, and there's naturally going to be some resistance. But I think it's still a useful thing to be discussing because there are some significant differences between big data and the traditional enterprise IT definition of data storage and analytics that we've seen in the past. First of all, big data is all about storing everything. By everything, we mean we don't know what we're going to do with the data when we collect it, but data is so cheap, storage is fairly cheap, and so we may as well hold on to it. So first of all, if you have an application that has much more data than an enterprise is used to, it's probably a big data application. The second thing is that because we've kept everything, we need human brains to find those patterns. Those patterns happen in a number of ways. It could be an analyst exploring some data and browsing through it where simply going through rows of spreadsheets doesn't work, and so we need visualizations. On the cutting or bleeding edge, we may need interactive 3D animations and immersive environments. But it may also be something as simple as someone surfing a website and getting purchasing recommendations, and the recommendations they need have to be calculated and pushed to them in the time it takes to load a web page. And so the pattern matching is happening as an augmentation of humans and machines. So the second way in which something can be big data, with air quotes around the big, is if it's about getting results from that data faster than usual. The third third thing is that we don't know what the data is for beforehand. And so because we've stored everything, we don't know how it's going to be applied. In many cases, two seemingly innocent data sets may be put together to be a very valuable data set. And so it's about analyzing unstructured data, which means that you're constantly trying to reframe it, segmenting it by a particular group, analyzing it by correlating it with some other table, that kind of stuff. And you're doing so in an interactive fashion where the analyst is actually immersed in the data, spending a lot of time trying out different schemas upon it. So in other words, you store the data and then you find the schema rather than defining the schema and then storing the data into it. And finally, we are overloaded. We have an abundance of data sources. So with so much information at our fingertips, this is also about connecting disparate data sets to one another. Now, there's a lot of stuff we have to do to get from here to there. If this is a chasm we're trying to cross, trying to go from tools that enterprises are familiar with, ODBC interfaces, SQL, data cubes, joins, data warehouses, and so on, to these new and rather unusual sounding things over on the right, combining things in memory, sharding them, eventual consistency, and that kind of stuff. This is a big chasm to cross, and it's going to take us a while for enterprises to adopt. The industry isn't really helping itself because whenever products in a particular industry sound like cartoon characters, you know it's early days. If you were to list the tools that are popular in the big data industry, Hadoop, Mongo, Cassandra, Basho, and Pig, you'd be tempted to think that this is some Saturday morning kids cartoon, not a set of technologies. And early on, before the business cases are obvious to enterprise, we tend to rally around the names and the brands rather than the applications. But despite this, what you might think is fluffery, people will come around, there's no doubt. John Boyd is a brilliant military strategist, and I think one of the first feedback economists. What I mean by this is that we are living increasingly in a feedback economy where the efficiencies that we crave, the optimizations we want, come from learning from our actions, feeding that back into a system, and making a set of decisions, whether we're trying to hire and fire better or clean up our supply chains or do better strategic planning. And the ability to do that better than the competition is key to survival for enterprises in the coming decade. John Boyd was a military strategist, as I said, and he's famous for something called the OODA Loop. The OODA Loop stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And it basically says that you should take all of the information up front that you know about your situation and so on, orient yourself according to that information. What does your enemy know? What kind of plane is he flying? That kind of thing. Make a decision. Should I veer to the left or veer to the right? Test that decision, and then very quickly look at the feedback and figure out, did it provoke a reaction I wanted? Does it give me some kind of advantage? And so the OODA Loop is simply a feedback mechanism that involves collecting a lot of data about what's going on around you and then applying that data to the information you can collect about the industry. And the market and your competition and things like that, and then using that information to make a better business that can react more quickly and more nimbly than your competitors can. And so looking at this diagram, I want to give you a second view of the world. This is what I would call the big data supply chain. In an enterprise environment or in any environment where you're applying big data stuff, you probably start out with something like a form of data collection, and that data's got to be ingested into your organization and cleansed, and then it's stored on some kind of infrastructure. There are a number of platforms on which that infrastructure is running. There are machine learning and data mining tasks happening. Some of them are done by humans that are exploring that information. Hopefully you analyze insights, come up with schemas and so on, and store that stuff. You share it with the outside world either by publishing it or acting upon it, and then you measure the results and create feedback. And if this looks like Boyd's OODA Loop, that's no coincidence. The reason it's so interesting for enterprises is that while data scientists and analysts work in the core, business users work at a slightly wider span, asking the questions, implementing the answers, and then corporate governance and policy dictates what we can collect, how we can share it, and so on. If these sound like all the important trends you're hearing in IT magazines and CIOs are talking about, that's because they are. Over on the left here, we have social media, personal sensors, the Internet of Things. Ingesting and cleaning is things like using Mechanical Turks, sourcing, the semantic web. Down in the bottom of the infrastructure and platforms, you have Hadoop, you have the advent of public clouds that are elastic, you have virtualization, Bayesian networks, machine learning, natural language parsing, visualization, interactive UIs, augmented reality. In the storage side, we're talking about sharding and NoSQL, and then the organizational transparency that people are increasingly demanding. So all of these things that pretty much make up the cover of the average CIO magazine are now front and center in this discussion of big data. And that's one of the reasons why I think enterprise IT and enterprise businesses are going to be very quick to adopt big data practices. Let's put this another way. When your employees come to work in the morning and they know more about their friends than they know about where the trucks are or whether you're going to make the sales quota that quarter, something is wrong. And that's going to be shifting dramatically as people bring their consumer expectations of a shared feedback life into the enterprise. And ultimately, we're going to spend our time visualizing and analyzing everything. And we will pretty much spend our time optimizing every process within the business. And for enterprises, the company that wins is going to be the one that can iterate through this cycle as quickly as possible. So we have a great lineup to talk about today, and along the way, please feel free to join in with the StrataConf hashtag. If you want to attend Strata, which is the conference we're running on this subject in Santa Clara, February 28th, and you're on this conference, you're welcome to use the OLC5 code to save 20% off the cost of attending that conference. We have a great lineup here online, and I'm going to hand things over to Diego Sanz and Jonathan Brunner for our first conversation about what CEOs can do to accelerate data mindsets. Diego.
Hello, everyone. This is John Brunner here. I'm a data journalist with Forbes magazine, and with me is Diego Sanz, whose current company is called Data Driven CEO, and it aims to help enterprises adopt some big data practices and get more out of their big data. And before then, he was he's been a CIO for Pepsi Latin America, and he's helped other companies like Burger King adopt practices that help them get more out of their big data. So Diego has a few slides to start out with, and to give a little background on his work and where he's coming from. And after that, I'll ask him a few questions, and then we can take some questions from the audience as well.
Thanks, John. This is Diego. I'm very excited to be part of this call because I have lived in kind of both worlds in terms of the enterprise and the startup. Been fortunate to spend about a decade in corporate IT, both as a consultant with Accenture and as the head of Pepsi Latin America Technology Group. And I oversaw South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, all kinds of technology projects from bottling systems to marketing, and then made a jump to the entrepreneurial world back in 2000. So I just feel passionate about both. I think that there's incredible, valuable things that we can learn from each other. Both, I'm assuming in this call we have both startup people and both enterprise IT people. So the big question that we have is, will large enterprise be slow to adopt big data? And we always think of the large ship versus the speedboat, right? So you have a small company, the startup, the web, and it's a speedboat, can move very quickly, can go very fast, whereas if you have a large boat that you need to move, is very, very difficult. So the question that I had and that I've been exploring for some time now is, will large enterprise be slow to a big data? And quite frankly, that was my hypothesis when I started to work on this, is that they would be very slow. So I set out on a search to find out who is really implementing big data effectively in the enterprise, and what are the keys to doing that. So what I learned is that so we look at the technology adoption cycle of big data. So we all heard about Facebook and LinkedIn and Web 2.0 companies, and we know they get big data because inherently their business is digital. If the majority of your business is conducted online, your company the DNA is digital. So adopting big data is just a natural extension of your work. So it's no surprise that the innovators have been the Web 2.0. So the question is, how about large enterprises? Will they be part of the early majority, of the late majority? Will they be the laggards? And what I'm starting to find out after looking at the enterprise marketplace is that I think it's going to be both, but we're starting to see, and I have a very interesting case study to share with you of an early adopter for big data. And I want to pull out a couple of lessons as to what we can all learn from that, and maybe you can apply it to your enterprise. So when we look at big data, and we look at, okay, let's look at a big company, at a big enterprise. And my background is consumer product goods, working at PepsiCo, Burger King, and others. So I took one of the largest, or the largest consumer product goods company, which is Procter Gamble, $84 billion in revenues, right? So this is a giant. And then when you compare that with a LinkedIn, which is a leader in the use of big data, but when you look at it from a straight revenue point of view, the company is less than $100 million. So a different scale completely. When you look at the DNA of a large enterprise, especially the innovative market-leading enterprises, they have always exploited data. Just a fact that is quite interesting. We talk about predictive analytics. And we say, okay, P&G and Pepsi, by the way, did the same thing, had been profit forecasting on a monthly basis. And P&G's been doing it for about 40 years. I worked on a financial forecasting system using multiple source data at Pepsi back in the 90s. So these companies, and I'm sure many of you are working on that, have been doing predictive analytics based on big data. There are some things that are inherently different that I think that large enterprises can learn from the LinkedIns, from the Facebooks, and certain things that were not possible before are now possible, which are tremendously exciting. So I'll give you a couple of them. One is, in the last 10 years, the ubiquitous high-speed networking. That gives tremendous access to data. And so now we're all interconnected. That was not possible 20 years ago. High-speed analysis with multiple streams of information, both structured and unstructured. So these are the enablers that are going into the enterprise. The software today is much better, quite frankly, both on the server side, like in Hadoop, and even in the front-end side with some analytic tools like Tableau. And then more powerful CPUs. For those of you that have been around the enterprise, you may recall 15, 20 years ago, if you wanted to get CPU allocation and you were part of a large bank or a large enterprise, you had to get your job scheduled by this central IT department and make sure that you didn't consume too many resources, and there were overnight batch jobs, and it was a very precious and expensive resource. Well, that's very cheap today. CPUs are more and more powerful, so we can do all this at a much, much lower cost. So this is the key technology enabler. So I'm going to give you a quick example, which is, many of you may have heard of this, but I think this is truly best in class, which is Procter & Gamble's Business Sphere. And basically, Filippo Passerini is the CIO for Procter & Gamble. He was named Chief of the Year in 2010, and he was on a mission to digitize the company end to end and to provide information. Now, just to give you a sense of scale, which is quite amazing, P&G does 4 billion daily transactions on products purchased over 80 countries. So like Alistair was talking about, it's capturing all this data and now unlocking the power with this technology. In their headquarters in Ohio, they have two 8-foot by 30-foot screens with real-time data feeds where their senior management team gets together. And with 4 clicks on an iPad, they can change the screen from a world map and look at toothpaste prices in India and then compare with local brands and look at market share. That is unbelievable that a company this size can process that much data real time and have a view of that. So this talks about the power of that. So in terms of the use of big data in big companies, I think these new web technologies are truly unlocking the power to do that. The key to all this, to me, it starts at the top, which is with the CEO, the CIO, the CMO. And Bob McDonnell is the CEO for Procter & Gamble. Bob has been a long-term P&G. He grew up as a brand manager. And he's got incredible leadership and a very bold vision. So his vision, and this comes from not the CIO, but the CEO, and basically he's saying we're going to use technology to make Procter & Gamble operate like a $10 billion company rather than an $80 billion one. So that's a pretty bold statement. So he wants to be nimble and agile. $10 billion still large, but it's certainly a lot nimbler than an $80 billion company. He wants to add 1 billion consumers in 5 years. So truly this is global in scale. And he wants to digitize. Now, Procter & Gamble is not naturally digital, right, like the web companies, right? They do a lot of stuff in different systems and physical products and retail outlets. But he wants to digitize the company from the creation of the molecules on the Tide all the way to running the factories and the point of sale. So this is a big, bold vision. Now, one of the biggest issues for CIOs has been how strategic is IT? And here's one of the key opportunities. If I were running a large enterprise technology group today, I'd be thrilled to have big data. And the reason is this. You can now be a full strategic partner at the table with the rest of the CXO executives because data will actually drive revenues and profits in a very, very clear and tangible way. So the strategic value of IT can be demonstrated through the numbers. And you see that in this relationship with Bob McDonald and Filippo Passerini. They actually interviewed together as a CIO-CEO combo. So for those of you that run a large enterprise, this is a tremendous opportunity to really become a full strategic partner in your business and really drive the business forward. So just to summarize, I want to give you some of the key takeaways, and I'm going to be speaking at Strata in February where I'll go into more detail. But what can Fortune 500 CEOs do to accelerate the adoption of big data? And there's a number of things. And one, it starts with a bold vision. I love bold visions like Procter & Gamble, like PepsiCo. There needs to be a strong purpose, right? The data is not the end. It's a means to an end. Getting 1 billion customers in the next 5 years, that's a bold vision. A performance culture. So, people need to be comfortable with being measured because, quite frankly, data shines the light on performance. And, quite frankly, without the data, it's very easy sometimes to, do smoke and mirrors about performance. This makes everything very, very visible. And this will be a big culture change for many organizations. Executive team, I love to see very strong partnerships across the top. Successful companies have a really strong management team. I was fortunate at PepsiCo to be very close with the CEO, the CFO, CMO, and that's why we work so well together. I think big data can bring this relationship even closer together. I think that enterprises need to learn from the web leaders. There's a tremendous amount of innovation going on Facebook and LinkedIn and companies like that, Twitter. And then leverage the core strengths. If you have data strengths, and many enterprises in this call, you've been using data and managing data and doing some amazing stuff like forecasting worldwide profits across 80 countries, so through predictive analytics. So now with this big data tools, you can do that even faster and cheaper. Anyway, so hope this illustrates of somebody that is doing it today. And, oh, by the way, Filippo Passerini was named the Chief Information Officer by Information Week in 2010. And what's remarkable about that is that this was in 2010. So they have been doing this, quite frankly, even before big data became a buzzword and people started to pay attention to it. So many of you have been working on big data even before the big data movement. So hope this is helpful. Look forward to catching up with everybody in Santa Clara. John?
Thanks, Diego. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the democratization of data that big data is bringing about, particularly within companies. Companies have a lot more data. Do they need to share it within their organizations? And when they do, what sort of impact does that have on leadership teams and the way that they operate?
Yeah, that's a great question because if you're going to have the data, you got to share it and make it transparent. So I'll talk about the two quick examples. One in Procter & Gamble, they have the same data that is in the executive boardroom. And one of the things is cross-country comparisons. So they're in 80 countries. So the U.S. knows what Canada or what Mexico or what Europe is doing. So they have something called Cockpits, which is a web-based product that 38,000 employees can log into and see the same data that the senior management team is doing. So that offers tremendous value to the organization. For the executive team, quite frankly, they spend less time regurgitating the numbers and really understanding the strategic impact of those numbers. So, for example, big companies tend to work on months, quarters, and years, and then the monthly letter recaps the numbers. You do a quarterly review, typically in person, and then your annual operating, and you spend half the time just restating the numbers. Procter Gamble says, I know the numbers. I see them on a weekly basis. I want you to write me a letter and talk to him about the strategic implication of those numbers and the actions you're taking. So it works both at the senior level and then down at the plant floor level. One example in Pepsi, one of our bottlers of the year when I was there, and this is so simple yet so powerful. He had a red line, blue line, and the red line was the cost, and the blue line was the revenue. And he had this data posted all over his bottling plants, and he told minimum wage employees in Asia, your job is to make sure that the blue line is always bigger than the red line. And that's, democratizing data. And through that very simple, powerful sharing of data, he ran a very, very profitable bottling organization.
Excellent. And so, could you talk a little bit about getting started with big data? I mean, say you're a mid-sized company, not Fortune 500, and the promise of big data has been sort of out of reach expense-wise until now, and so maybe you haven't given a great deal of thought to what big data can do for you. What's the first step to figuring out how big data is going to help your company and what you want it to do?
Yeah, great question, both in terms of how to get started and mid-enterprise. I was also CIO for a mid-sized company, $2 billion in revenue, and I think, quite frankly, that before the Procter & Gamble has a huge budget, right? The fact is they have 7,000 people working on their data initiative, right? I mean, that's a lot of resource and a lot of leverage over the big vendors, but, not every company, most companies don't have that luxury. The good news is because web companies started this, Hadoop, open source makes this very affordable. So I see companies, quite frankly, even in the hundreds of millions, being able to have access to big data at a very, very low cost. So I'm truly excited about that because, quite frankly, these companies can really scale their growth if they could unlock the power of their data. In terms of where to start, I have a bias because I'm a marketing guy at heart. But if I were a CIO today, I would partner with my chief marketing officer because marketing is becoming inherently digital and data-driven. And I would take him out to a very nice lunch and just say, hey, let's really make some money. Let's drive some revenue. Data can help you. Let's partner with this. So when I got promoted to be the CIO of Pepsi, the people that took me out to lunch in Brazil were the marketing people. So I love marketing people, and I think that's a great partnership.
Awesome. Before I ask Diego my final question for him as we come up to the end of our time period here, if anyone in the audience has a question for Diego or me, you can either submit it through your conference dashboard or tweet at me. I'm at JONBRUNER, at John Bruner. So Diego, a lot of people on the call, a lot of companies here might be a little envious of a firm like LinkedIn, whose customers hand it a great deal of personal and professional data that makes it easy to understand their customers and figure out who they are and what they're looking for and how to better serve them and connect them to each other. How is big data changing the process of data gathering, even for companies whose customers aren't just handing them long forms full of personal and professional data?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a bit more challenging, but still doable. The first place to start would be the social networks, and I would start capturing if people obviously get their Twitter handle, get them to be part of Facebook and log in with Facebook, so you can start getting some of their social data. I think that's very important. The other thing that's remarkable today is with a single email address, and there's companies out there like Rapleaf, they can give you incredible amount of information about customers. So there is there's companies that specialize in gathering data throughout the internet, and then you can basically purchase that data legally just by an email address. And the other thing, quite frankly, is the closer the relationship you have with the customers, the more data they'll give you. People are more willing today to share their data than ever before. You just need to give them a good reason why.
Awesome. So we've got a question from one of our audience members. Tanja asks, where can I learn more about Procter & Gamble's transition? Has anything been published?
Yes, McKinsey. If you go to McKinsey and search on that, McKinsey did a great case study on that. McKinsey, the consulting company, did a great case study on Bob and the work done there. Also, Search Information Week for Filippo Passerini, Filippo, and Passerini, Passerini. So search both guys. There's lots of stuff out there. It's really remarkable.
Excellent. All right, and I think we're right up at our time limit now. So
yeah, thanks, guys.
Diego, it's been a pleasure.